Trump is planning tariffs that could cripple the Canadian economy, and we're going to get into it and the implications that could come on the back of this. So kind of insane, but Trump has come out and announced that he plans to put on these massive tariffs to Mexico, Canada, and China. So what exactly is he saying? And by the way, the response to that was the Canadian dollar, which fell to a new low once again. So not a good sign there. So President-elect Donald Trump said on Monday that he would impose tariffs on all products coming into the United States from Canada, Mexico, and China on his first day in office, a move that would scramble global supply chains and impose heavy costs on companies that rely on doing business with some of the world's largest economies. In a post on Truth Social, Mr. Trump mentioned a caravan of migrants making its way to the United States from Mexico and said he would use an executive order to levy a 25% tariff on goods from Canada and Mexico until drugs and migrants stopped coming over the border. Now, this is really interesting because obviously tariffs, most people aren't going to understand what tariffs actually do, but tariffs essentially are not only going to have a cost for the people in Canada and Mexico and also China, they're going to have a huge cost, 90% of which is going to be passed on to the consumer in the United States. Now, obviously, there would be a huge economic consequence that would come with this, especially for countries like Canada and Mexico, who are the US's main trading partners here. But what's insane is to think that the US won't be affected by this. Obviously, this is a big government move as well, because tariffs, again, you're just increasing the size of a regulatory burden, essentially. And who really benefits off the tariffs? At the end of the day, it's not the United States. In fact, the consumer in the United States will pay the price for these tariffs. So Trump is basically unknowingly or knowingly using this as a political weapon to try and rally his supporters. Do I think he's likely to do it? I don't know, because he's done some pretty stupid things in the past. He's done some good things, but he's also done some stupid things. And this would definitely be a stupid thing. So what would it do to inflation in Canada? Well, it could actually cause deflation in Canada, because the fact is the tariffs would be so deflationary, their impact on the economy, that you could have deflation, because it would cause a lot of unemployment, restrictions on goods flowing, which would also cause inflation in the United States to rise as well. So the levels of inflation that we've seen in the past, we essentially would have a return to that. And Trump is somebody who's been promising to lower inflation. Now, interestingly enough, if you go to the 10-year Treasury, which is kind of like a good eye on what's going to happen with growth and inflation into the future over the next 10 years, and you can see that you did have a spike, especially since Trump got into office here, in the 10-year yield. Same thing happened worldwide because these markets are linked. It's global markets. But you didn't break the high that we actually had earlier in 2024 in around April. So again, it's still kind of maintaining a downward trend since the high that we saw in yields in 2023, which funnily enough was around the same time that we had the yields marching higher this year. So a lot of that could be seasonality that's also playing into it. So anyway, let's read on here and see what else he's saying. This tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country, the president-elect wrote. And I mean, again, he's just kind of rallying up fear and hysteria around him at this point. And I'm not really so sure that that's the case and that these countries can really control it. Obviously, the United States heavily involved in it as well. Both Mexico and Canada have the absolute right and power to easily solve this long simmering problem, he added. We hereby demand that they use this power. And until such time that they do, it is time for them to pay a very big big price. I mean, if you remember before, Trump had his wall. We're going to build a wall. This wall is going to be magnificent and nobody's going to get across that. And, you know, he did slow down a lot of the migrant flow, but that wasn't because of the wall. I mean, people were easily getting through the gaps in the wall, and it'll be exactly the same thing when it comes to these tariffs. I mean, a tariff's really going to work when it comes to illegal drugs and illegal migration. Yeah, I don't really think that's going to have the case. I mean, they're kind of trying to build the case that if we put these massive restrictions with tariffs on other countries, that it's going to somehow benefit them in a way. But actually, it's like stabbing yourself in the back. So essentially, he's not going to do a good thing for the American people. And I don't think it would last long. I just think it's a threat, essentially, at this point. And if he actually does it, then he really is really stupid, because it's going to impact the United States the most. They're going to be the primary target of who's affected by this. The tariffs would also have serious implications for American industries, including auto manufacturers, farmers, and food packagers, which busily ship parts, materials, and finished goods across U.S. borders to Mexico, China, and Canada. Together account for more than 1/3 of the goods and services both imported and exported by the United States, supporting tens of millions of American jobs. And the New York Times is not wrong there. You know, there would be serious implications for the United States here, which they have to acknowledge. And, you know, Trump isn't acknowledging that. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of his supporters and a lot of people don't understand that the way tariffs work is it's not like you impose a 25% tariff and then the Canadians are going to pay that 25% tariff. All those tariffs will be passed on to the consumer, because it's like in Costa Rica. If you go to Costa Rica, cars are incredibly expensive in Costa Rica. Yet you can go across the border to Panama and buy a car for a third or even half of the price. Now, why is that? It's not the sales tax difference. It's because they have high tariffs in Costa Rica. So who's paying the price for those tariffs? It's the Ticos in Costa Rica. It's not the people in the United States where those cars are being imported from, for example. So it's just kind of ridiculous, and people need to be educated on this, and they're not, unfortunately. The costs could be particularly high for the industries that depend on the tightly integrated North American market, which has been knit together by a free trade agreement for over 3 decades. Adding 25% to the price of imported products could make many too costly, potentially crippling trade around the continent. It could also invite retaliation from other governments, which could put their own levies on American exports, which is true. You know, it's not just America that can do the tariffs. In the case of the United States, Canada, Mexico would likely retaliate. And essentially what you would have is just inflation going up and up and up and up. And the people who would be primarily affected by this rising inflation, is it going to be the politicians like Trump? No, it's going to be the consumer and the average Joe and Jane. And that's what people need to seriously understand here, is that these tariffs will have huge implications to the United States, also to the Canadian economy, which is very weak right now, as we know. So the fact is, the loonie has fallen. It's recovered since a little bit, but it's still just hanging around those lows. It's nowhere near its high point of this year right now, and we can only expect the downtrend to continue, but it's been extremely weak for the past couple of months, so I would expect some sort of relief rally going into the future. But should people really be scared of this threat here? Well, yes, I think they should be, because a lot of industries would be affected by this. The United States would be affected by this. Canada equally. The economy would be massively affected by this. So we have to stay tuned on this and see what happens. I think that really Trump is unfortunately showing how he doesn't understand the economy, like most politicians. Unfortunately, there's a lot of hysteria that is whipped up in these elections, like no doubt there will be next year with Pierre coming in to power in the next election in Canada, which looks obvious to to happen. I think it's the pure hopium that people are hanging on to, that they're going to be able to fix everything, but in reality, they can do very little because it's took decades of economic mismanagement, including the Republican Party and the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party and the Democrats, to get to the point we're at today. So they've all been involved in it. So anyway, guys, I want to thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, I'd highly recommend that you check out this video about boycotting these Western countries. And then if you're looking for a VPN, click the link right here. This also helps support the channel, and it's the VPN that I use, ExpressVPN, and I will see you in the next one.